What is up, Impact Heroes? Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rick Ornelas. Thank you for spending some time with us today because we know time's a valuable resource and we're going to make it worth your while. I appreciate each and every one of you, not just for listening, but for who you are. I know you're sparking change to make the world a better place every day, and I am humbled and grateful for your efforts. It takes all of us doing our part to spread positive change, and that's what this show is all about. Motivating you with stories of struggle, courage, and hope to empower you to make a difference in your life and the lives of others.
Are you interested in having Rick speak at your event or business? Here is what others have to say.
Did not know his story, and it was so inspirational, and his presence on stage, his authenticity was just incredible.
I absolutely loved his performance. It made me feel some type of way.
If you're looking for a speaker for your next event, hire Rick. I promise you this, you will not be disappointed.
Visit rickornelas.com to book him today.
Welcome back, Impact Heroes. Today we have the pleasure of speaking to our latest iSpark Change social impact hero. Our guest today is a man who I feel genuinely blessed to speak to. He's a humble traveler with understanding, compassion, empathy, and a huge heart of love. He's a source of comfort for those who have questions about what comes after death, the glories of heaven, and the love of God in Jesus Christ. He's the only person I've ever met with a copy of his own death certificate and the author of the incredible book, Heaven, An Unexpected Journey, which had a huge impact on me. He's inspirational, empowering, and as caring and genuine as they come. He's just an all-around beautiful human being who I consider an angel with the light of God within him. Please welcome Mr. Jim Woodford. Jim, welcome to the iSpark Change podcast. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Rick. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into your story, Jim, I was really moved by a lot of the things we discussed on our last conversation offline. And one thing I wanted to share was what you told me that you and I, we have the synchronicity of Christ. And that was really special. That was really special for me. And so I wonder if you could share with the audience, what does this mean to you for us to have the synchronicity of Christ?
Yes, and I came to be told about this during my experience. What we as mankind perceive to be coincidences are not coincidences at all, and we've all heard the term déjà vu. And what I learned was that there are no such things as coincidences. There are the synchronicities of Christ. And I believe your mother, letting you know about me, and our subsequent conversations are a perfect example of the synchronicity of Christ. And yet people tend to confuse that with, well, if God foreordains what we do in life, how come my life has gone this way? Because what is sacrosanct with God and with Jesus is that they gave us free will. Rick, something that he didn't even give the angels, free will. And we, as humanity, take that so for granted that we allow it to interfere with our connection with God. And so when God synchronizes our lives to meet certain people, as you and I met, and as soon as you said your mother referred you to me or mentioned me to you, I smiled inwardly because I was told this by the guardians. The only thing we have on earth that comes even close to the love of God for us is the love of a mother. Now, fellows, hold on. Fathers are important too, but think about this. Just as we are of God, we are of our mothers. We come from God, we come from our mothers. Certainly our fathers have something to do with it, but we come from our mother. And there's an irrevocable bond between a mother and her child. And of course, you can always point to incidences where that may not be apparent, but by and large it is. And so the synchronicity of Christ is evident in how your mom saw me, and then I'm with you, and now we're with all of your people that watch your podcast.
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful, Jim. And I know my mother especially will be touched by what you just shared, but I hope other moms that listen to the show will resonate with that message, because it is true. And me being a father of three beautiful girls, I can understand that there is nothing like that bond that a mother has with her child. And I know, not only have I seen it with my wife and my daughters, but I know I really saw it in 2004 when my one of my sisters passed away, and how my mother dealt with the death of her child, and still deals with that to this day. And everything that she shared with me about that connection, there's nothing like it. And so it's easier, I guess. I don't want to say easier, but it's easy for me to understand what you mean by that. Comes close. The only thing that comes close on earth to the love of God for us.
And I was like you. I was blessed with a wonderful mother. My father died when I was 2 years old, and back in the early 50s, there wasn't much in the way of a social safety net for a widow. But bless her heart, somehow she provided us with a great life, and she's passed now. But she was a god. All mothers are godsends.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, one of the big reasons I wanted to have you on the show is because on this podcast we feature people that I consider social impact heroes. And my definition of a social impact hero is just someone that is spreading positive change, is doing their part to better the world and better humanity, and spread kindness and love and inspiration. And I feel that you truly embody that in everything that you're doing. And so I know that you've had your own journey of how you got here, your own heroic journey. But if you can share really that big turning point for you of what put you on this latest path that you're on, the heart of your story, I think that would be fantastic for everyone to hear.
Sure. As I said, my mom was widowed at a young age. She was only in her early 20s. But getting back to my particular story, I look back on my life now, and I can't believe, for someone who thought that he was reasonably intelligent, and you develop when you become an airline pilot, and I say this in all modesty and friendliness to any pilots that may be listening, we are somewhat guilty of arrogance. And we don't come by it naturally, but after you've flown 25, 30,000 hours and safely delivered a lot of people to their destinations, you become a little bit arrogant. So let me go back a little further. So I was born in the province of Newfoundland, Canada, and if any of your viewers have been there, they know it's a really unique, beautiful island off the east coast of Canada, and and then part of it is on the mainland, adjacent to Quebec, but there's a body of water between that as well. So it's the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, and back in when I was born, and growing up as a 8-10-year-old, there was how you got around a lot was by float and ski plane. And so we would get excited because our grandmothers, where we lived with our grandparents and my mom, we were on a lake, and you could see these wonderful aircraft coming into land ever so gracefully on the blue waters of the lake. And in the winter, on the soft snow, they would come in on skis. And so having that early introduction to aviation, I just fell in love with it. I just fell in love with anything to do with flying or airplanes. And we were poor, but I carved my own aircraft out of wood, toy aircraft out of wood, and but never in my life dreamed that I would ever have the ability, the financial ability, to attend flying school. But getting back to our mothers, there's one thing about a mom. Mothers know better than anyone the dream that's in their children's hearts. And when I was pretty much through high school, my mother sat me down with my grandparents, and somehow on a meager salary as a secretary, with the help of a friend, a local doctor, and his wife, she informed me that she had watched my love of flying and aircraft all my formative years, and now as a teenager, it seemed to be all I wanted to do. And she said, "So I have arranged for the funds to be able to send you to flying school." Well, look, even today, all these years later, I am so thrilled. I remember the thrill of it. The dream that I had quietly kept within my heart was now to become a reality. And so I was only 17, and when I enrolled in flying school, I wasn't quite, and back then, there was a shortage of pilots. It was the era of the Vietnam War, and although Canada was not involved, many of the pilots in the U.S. had gone in the service, and a lot of the senior pilots from Canada had gravitated to the U.S. for better job opportunities. And so I ended up graduating from flying school and having about 10 job offers. Rick, I had to wait about 5 months till I turned 18 so they could insure me. And of
That's great.
course, like any job, you start on the ground floor. So I started by emptying the honey carts on the aircraft, which are the toilets. And but these were on float planes, and so. But I learned I was a ramp rat for a while, and loading baggage, and but eventually the day came when I was hired on by a small bush outfit, and found myself doing pipeline patrol and power transmission line patrol in the north, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'll try and not keep telling these old war stories, but it was a wonderful time of my life. I was young and eager, and just in love with everything. And I made it my mission in life to fly everything I could get my hands on. So if I saw an aircraft that someone had, I'd ask if I could pay them to take me up and let me at least get checked out on it. And so I'm now rated on over 42 aircraft, right from
Yeah, I noticed that. That's incredible.
right from a small Super Cub right up to a multi-engine jet. So and it's been a great career. And of course, I'm retired now. I'm 74, and so I've been retired for a while. But it was a great life, and I sometimes come to the realization that the arrogance that I mentioned a few minutes ago came easily, because once you start delivering 100, 200, 300 people to their destination through dark skies with lightning around you and a hurricane force wind, and you safely deliver them to their loved ones, that's a wonderfully rewarding thing. Because think about it for a moment. Sitting behind me, completely dependent on my skills and my training, are all these people. And their loved ones are waiting for them. And so when I'd done that quite a few times, I became arrogant. And, and I say this, and it always gets a laugh. As I said, all those people sitting behind me, maybe 250 SOBs, completely dependent on me. And by the way, before anyone has a heart attack, SOBs means souls on board. And that's the way the manifest reads, souls on board.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're transporting coffins in the hold. So if there's a catastrophic accident and fire, and you had 200 passengers and they find 204 bodies, you had 4 coffins in the hold.
Wow.
But don't mean to digress, but yeah, SOBs, souls on board. So I led a charmed life, it seemed. I graduated from flying bush and took a job in Europe and ended up flying for a freighter operation that had a. I didn't want to. I did some regular passenger route work, but I loved the challenge and the opportunity of going to different countries and and remote locations and tough airports to get in and out of, and it was just so challenging. So I flew for a company that specialized in delivering oil rig equipment all over the world, and we flew aircraft that was capable of carrying that large equipment. And so I'm even checked out on some Russian aircraft. So interesting career. But I and then as I advanced in my career, and I met people who were a lot smarter than I was in the investment business, and I was able to get in on the early tech days. I had some capital to invest, and so I ended up owning some companies as well. So I had developed the reputation of being my nickname, Rick, was Diamond Jim, because everything I touched turned to diamonds. Not gold, diamonds. So Diamond Jim. And I speak to that as the arrogance. And I went through a long time of just loving what I did. If you're, for the young people that are watching and you're about to start a career, if you can find a career that you absolutely love to do it, that you want to do it on the weekends as well, and and on top of that, they pay you extraordinarily large amounts of money to do it, then you're really blessed, a job that you love and you're well compensated for it. So that was my life for a long time. And I'd never been sick a day in my life, other than maybe a head cold I picked up in Tibet one time. Uh, but I was charmed. And looking back now, I realize that even then God had his hand on my life. But in my arrogance, it was all me. So fast forward to 2012, 2013. Uh, I By that time I had uh, gravitated. I was disengaging. I'd had a lifetime of flying, and still did it on special runs, but had invested in some companies and so on. And life was good, and we had a wonderful life. And the only thing that had been missing was, uh, and I found her on horseback. And I know when I tell this story about how my wife and I met, because she's such an integral part of this story. She is the spirit behind this story. And my wife, Lorraine, she and I met on horseback on a frozen lake in the middle of the winter on a sunny day. And if I can divert for a moment, because I think people will enjoy this. And
Yeah, that's something straight out of a Hallmark movie.
well, I was just about to say, it sounds like something from Walt Disney or Hallmark, but it actually happened. I had moved to this part of Canada, and by that time I was living in Europe, but I had particular expertise on certain types of aircraft, and the company wanted me to come and train their people. And so I came, and I brought my horse with me. And I didn't have many weekends off, but on this particular weekend, uh, I decided to go riding, and I went to where I boarded the horse, and it was snowy and cold, but beautiful. One of those blue sky winter days that you see in the north that are absolutely breathtaking, and if you can handle the cold. And so I saddled up, and the ironic thing is, this horse I was riding was an Arabian, and she was what they call a push-button horse, Rick. She obeyed everything, and I ended up deciding to go for a ride that morning, that afternoon, and when I got out to the trail from the barn, she absolutely refused to go left where I wanted to go. And this was completely out of character. But here, once again, the synchronicities of Christ. And so finally, I was losing time, and I decided to let her go to the right, which you should never do, allow them to have their own way. But I did. And the lake, the river, was completely frozen over, and people were out on it with vehicles because they were ice fishing. So there was lots of ice, and I had special shoes on the horse to allow me to walk on the ice, allow the horse to walk on the ice. So I'm just kind of trotting along the ice on the side, and suddenly my horse stops and swings and looks across to the other side of the river. And I can't believe it, because on the other side of the river, cantering along, is this beautiful white Arabian horse. And for those horse owners that are listening, you can tell an Arabian by the arch of its head and the dish in its face and the high tail carriage. And I thought, who would be out riding on this cold day on an Arabian? And then I realized that the other horse had seen me, and it stopped and looked at me, and the river was about a quarter of a mile. And then I noticed the horse started to canter toward me. So I started to canter toward that horse. And here we are. Here's where the Walt Disney part comes in. Cantering over the ice toward each other. Music playing in the background. Well, back then I had a Walkman on. You probably remember what a Walkman was.
Oh, yeah.
And as the classical music played, we cantered. And our horses met, and as horses will do, they put their heads together and blew into each other's nostrils. And I look across at the other rider, and I thought I was looking at this young teenager, because she was just the prettiest thing, but she was all bundled up, and to ride in the winter. And I realized she was probably quite young, and so we had a wonderful conversation about horses and Arabians in particular. And we sat there on our horses until they got impatient, and as the sun was setting, we said goodbye and parted, and I never ever thought I'd see her again. Well, fast forward to that next spring, and I'm riding again in the woods, and I had not seen her, and I heard someone yell, "Jim, Jim," and I looked behind, and it's her coming on her horse on another trail. And I know this sounds kind of a Hallmark thing, as you said, but I do believe in love at first sight. And especially when I realized she wasn't a teenager. She was in her 30s, almost 30. I was significantly older by about 13 years. But anyway, there was just an instant connection and a bond, and all leading to what I now realize is God putting someone in my life to help me through the journey that I went through death, and then the encouragement of coming out the other side. And for people that may be interested, and I'm not hawking a book, but this is the book that I wrote called Heaven, An Unexpected Journey. And chapter 10 in there, chapter 10 in there was written by Lorraine, and she's been such a blessing, and just an absolute earth angel. So that led to that. So again, fast forward to 2012, 2013, I had throttled back quite a bit and was enjoying life with my investments. And we were at our cottage, and Lakeside Cottage, and I woke up on a Sunday morning. And of course, Lorraine was always very spirit-filled and attended church regularly. I'd go every now and then. I wasn't agnostic. I think, like a lot of people, I hoped someone was in charge of the chaos, but never sought it out. I was raised Catholic and loved all things about it, especially the fact we had a good hockey team that I played on. So that's the dream of every Canadian boy and girl. So anyway, we got to Lorraine went to church, and I realized when I got up to go on my boat that my hands and feet felt numb, as though I had how you sleep on your arm or your leg and it feels numb when you wake up. But I had this in all four extremities. But I tried to work through it, and but by the time Lorraine came home in the afternoon, I was quite sick, and there were other things. So I'm definitely not well. But by early in the week, Lorraine, who was a nurse, suggested I go to the doctor, and I went. And he just told me I had a touch of the flu and that I should go home and rest. Well, by the end of the week, I had difficulty standing, had no balance, and there was paralysis setting in. Both hands were curling inward this way. Anyway, getting to the point, they didn't know what was wrong with me. And finally, I was admitted to hospital, and uh, most doctors don't see this condition in their entire career. It's a little more common now since the Zika virus and COVID, but I had developed a disease called Guillain-Barré. And for your listeners, if you look that up, it's the two French, named after the two French doctors who first isolated the disease in Paris. And what it is your own autoimmune system attacks the myelin sheath on your brainstem and erodes the myelin sheath. And it's similar to if you cut the rubber off an extension cord and expose the wires, all the signals from your brain go haywire. So I was becoming paralyzed, unable to balance myself, unable to eat, unable to feed myself. So I went literally in 3 weeks from a guy that flew jets, rode horses, did a lot of sports, enjoyed water skiing, to someone that couldn't even feed themselves. And you would have thought, and I'm sure your listeners would agree with this, that at that point, did I ever think about raising my eyes to heaven and saying, God, if you exist, would you help me? Not me. Not the arrogant Diamond Jim. I'd conquered everything I'd ever encountered, from engine flameouts at 35,000 feet and fire on board and a couple of unannounced quick descents into the Canadian bush through engine failures. And I survived it all. So that's what I mean when I talk about the arrogance. But anyway, finally they admitted me to the hospital, discovered I had Guillain-Barré. But because of the delay in the diagnosis, I had missed the opportunity for early treatment. And so I went into a full-blown case of Guillain-Barré. And quite often you die at that point. And because the paralysis comes up your body and into your lungs, and you simply die. But I did get through that. But it took me a long time. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, I had terrible weakness. I was in a wheelchair. Had to learn to walk, swallow, talk, all the things that you take for granted. And did I start to feel bitter? Of course. You can't lose you've ever known and not feel bitter. But I didn't pray about it at all. And I went through that year, 2013, so much pain at night that I would keep a leather strap by my bed to bite on so I wouldn't scream out and wake my family. They tried everything. When I got well enough to travel, I went to all the top neurologists I could find, even went to England for treatment on crutches, and nothing worked. But I was told about, while I was in England, an experimental drug that they were trying for people that had Guillain-Barré. And so got in touch with my doctors. They got in touch with the people in England. We got permission from Health Canada to bring in this special drug because it was not registered here. And it took about 4 months, but eventually I got this drug. And Rick, lo and behold, within 48 hours of being on it, I felt 60% better. And that was a huge turnaround.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So, I thought, oh, I finally found it, and so on. But I now understand the slippery slope of medication. And I'm sure your readers know what I'm talking about. When you have unbearable pain, and someone dangles something in front of you that takes away 60% of that pain. And I realize now how stupid it was, but I found, as many people do that are given prescription medication, that if you take a little more than you're supposed to, the effects last longer. And so I started abusing or taking the medication more often than I could, because I just loved feeling normal again. I was able to get back on a horse again. And anyway, I found that, and I now understand it better. But the more of this you take, the more you need, and I guess that's the central core of any kind of medication that relieves pain. And I had taken to stashing it all over the place. My wife, being a nurse, she regulated me quite carefully. But anyway, so we progressed to April of 2014, so not that long ago, when I had my death experience. And I remember waking up that day, and I was already way in excess of what I should take per day. But because I was so far away from the source, they had given me a fair amount of medication for future use. And I remember that day, I was trying to sell off some properties that I had. And I got a call from a survey company that said, we've surveyed the land that you asked us to do. We'd just like you to go and verify the markers that agree with your deed, and then we'll send you a bill. But he said, I'd like to get this cleaned up today if I could. So I hadn't driven in a while, but this property wasn't that far away that I owned, and it was all on a back road, a dirt road. So I very carefully got into my truck, and Lorraine wasn't at home, and I drove to that spot. By the time I got there, Rick, it was late in the afternoon. The sun was beginning to set. And I didn't plan it this way, but I just stopped the truck facing the sun on a slight rise, and just sat there waiting and thinking, do I have the strength to get out and walk this 12-acre field? And I discovered I had stashed some medication in the glove box, and I thought, well, I'll just take another one to get me around this. And I did, and I sat back in the truck waiting for that warm feeling of relief that would take the pain away. But it was not to be.
All right, Impact Heroes. I know you're enjoying Jim's story so far. We're going to pick it up next week in this special 2-part episode on the iSpark Change podcast. So be sure to tune in next week and hear all the amazing details of Jim's journey into heaven. We'll see you next week, Impact Heroes. Remember, Impact Heroes, every positive action can be a spark moment that has a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the initial act. So go out there and spark change. Don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, then please smash that 5-star rating on iTunes or Spotify and leave a review. We value your comments and we want to hear from you in the community. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and we'll see you next week on the iSpark Change podcast.